The story I've broken is titled UK Labour Party hires former Israeli spy. What I discovered was that Labour has hired a man called Asaf Kaplan as something called their new social listening manager. Essentially, it seems from the job position, he monitors discussion about the Labour Party on social media. And he is described by himself, by one of his former employees, as a Unit 8200 veteran. Unit 8200 is the Israeli military intelligence. They're essentially their cybercrime outfit, basically. They carry out mass surveillance against Palestinians, blackmail, extortion against Palestinians. And, there was a letter that whistleblowers released in The Guardian in 2014 where this was quite well documented. So this is who the Labour Party has chosen to hire. So I found out about this through my sources. I can't really say much more than that, except that I did manage to corroborate it independently through already existing sources, reliable sources, and it hasn't been denied, So as we're talking now, Kaplan himself has not responded to my request for comment. The Labour Party hasn't responded so far to my request for comment, but I've just been informed by yourself, actually, as you know, that Kaplan has now started to scrub some of his social media. So he's removed mention of Israeli military intelligence from his LinkedIn page. So we'll see if he scrubs the rest of his social media online. But of course, I've got copies. So yeah, the wider context is the fact that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn over the course of 5 years was under sustained assault, with the smears of anti-Semitism. That there was the smear campaign to portray Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters as anti-Semitic in order to sabotage the party, essentially, to stop it from becoming a left-wing party. And Labour's now moving back towards the right under Keir Starmer, back towards support for Israel in terms of its leadership. So this is really cementing that. And it also appears from what we know in terms of when the Kaplan's job listing was advertised, it appears very much that he seems to have been specifically hired, that they specifically wanted him or wanted an Israeli for this position, which is quite bizarre, really. I mean, because he's, as well as being, his LinkedIn shows that as well as being what he describes as a Unit 8200 veteran, he worked for the Israeli Labour Party. The Israeli Labour Party on their general election campaign in the election of April 2019. Well, the Israeli Labour Party used to be the ruling party of Israel, and it carried out some of Israel's worst crimes against Palestinians. The Nakba of 1948, dispossession, expulsion of Palestinians, and almost around 800,000 Palestinians was carried out by the Israeli Labour Party's political antecedents. And the military occupation of 1967 was carried out by the Israeli Labour Party. But just even on their own terms of allegedly wanting to win elections, this guy managed to he was the deputy head of the Israeli Labour Party's campaign and electoral campaign that year. There was more than one election that year, but the April 2019 electoral campaign. And they collapsed to 6 seats. So exactly how he's going to help Keir Starmer's Labour Party, win elections really seems questionable even on its own terms. The closing date to apply for the position, social listening manager, was the 30th of September. But then Only 18 days later on Facebook, this guy Kaplan posted that he had moved to London only 18 days later. And actually he said already here for a month. So if we take both of those things seriously, it sounds like he had actually moved to London before the closing date for the application. So, this is one of the questions that I've put to Labour in an email to Labour, asking them, how many people did you interview for this position? Because he seems to be confident enough to move to London, that he must have thought that he must have had reason to think that he'd got the position before it had even closed, ostensibly before the deadline for it to close. So it sounds like he was either hired, he was either headhunted, and this position was a bit of a farce. It sounds like that he was headhunted specifically, or they wanted an Israeli specifically. It's unclear at the moment, but we'll see if Labour comes back with anything. There are links between this guy Asaf Kaplan and the Israeli embassy so-called diplomat, in reality a spy, and it's Shai Masot. So Shai Masot and Asaf Kaplan are friends on Facebook, whatever that means, Facebook friends. They seem to know each other anyway. So Shai Masot actually incidentally is involved with the Israeli Labour Party, or has been in the past. So as the Al Jazeera documentary revealed, that the Israeli embassy's senior political officer Shai Masot was involved in a campaign to infiltrate and influence and sabotage the British political parties from the inside, and especially the Labour Party under Corbyn. And he had to. The Israeli ambassador Mark Regev at the time had to apologise to Boris Johnson, who was the foreign minister at the time, and Shai Masot was expelled from the UK. He was, on his business card, it said senior political officer. But yes, you're right. It seems that he was essentially an Israeli spy with the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, which is essentially a semi-covert sabotage agency to attack the BDS movement, the Palestinian-led campaign for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. So he was involved in trying to promote the so-called Labour anti-Semitism crisis in the Labour Party. And whatever the links between Shai Masot and Asaf Kaplan really remain to be seen, but he certainly seems to know enough to add him as a Facebook friend. You can add people, quite often people get added on Facebook. He might not know him very well, but they certainly seem to have a certain amount of links anyway. Yeah, I mean, if Jeremy Corbyn had hired someone from Russian, former Russian intelligence, it would have been in all the mainstream newspapers' front pages the next day. There's no doubt about that. It would have been massive, and I really doubt that my story is going to get that much attention. Having said that, has had quite a lot of attention online anyway. So there's people are knowing about it. So Canary's got millions of readers. We've got a massive readership, and so-called alternative or independent media is making a lot of inroads these days, and we're getting big readerships. But you're right, like it does show the hypocrisy of the so-called mainstream media, that they're not paying attention to this story as they should be. I expect Labour to come back with nothing, to ignore my request for comment, because that's habitually what they do. And yeah, I do think he'll keep his position, absolutely. Because they want the Labour Party under Keir Starmer wants to signal how friendly they are to Israel. And Keir Starmer, as you know, supports supports British intelligence carrying out crimes against British civilians. So why wouldn't he support Israeli intelligence carrying out crimes against Palestinians and other civilians around the world? You know, these spying operations have been carried out against Americans and British people as well. So yeah, absolutely. Like I've had one or two Israelis on Twitter come back and say, "Oh, well, you're just sort of picking on Israelis, and this was compulsory military service." That's wrong on two counts. First of all, Israeli conscription only lasts a year, 2.5 years, and Kaplan was in military intelligence for almost 5 years. So, you know, this was something he clearly enjoyed doing. And secondly, in reality, Israeli conscription is not really compulsory. As the actual figures for Israelis who enlist in reality is as low as 35%, depending on which figures you look at, because it's very easy to escape the so-called compulsory conscription. You just have to basically get a doctor's note to say that, you know, you're mentally unable to. So, and this is something that's quite well known. So it's wrong to say that you know, he had no choice to do this. You should subscribe to the Canary, send your money to the Canary. Independent media is the only guarantee of democracy.